Hi, everyone. I am Julie Zuckerman, author of the Book of Jeremiah, and welcome to the February Literary Modiin author event. For those of you who are new here, this is a monthly author series featuring books with Jewish content, mostly fiction, but occasionally narrative nonfiction and memoir and poetry. For those of you who are new here, this got started in June of 2019 as a way to bring local Israel-based authors to the large community of English readers we have in Modiin. And then we held several in-person events. And with the pandemic, we switched to Zoom, which has allowed us to hear from authors and welcome people in the audience from all over the world. So welcome. And this is our 69th event. Okay, the format of today's event is that each author, let me take a step back. Unfortunately, Ziva Bukai has come down with COVID and lost her voice completely. So she expresses her apologies and she cannot be here. And I will be having like a makeup session with her and two other authors on March 29th. So look out for details. Normally everybody has about 15 minutes to speak, but because Ziva's not here, we're going to give our authors and editors and translators a little bit more time today. So 20-ish to 25 minutes per book. So everyone is on mute. If you have any technical questions or technical difficulties, put that in the chat to me in a private note. And any questions you have for the authors, put that in the chat and we will get to all the questions at the end. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first author. Sonia Daccarett is a writer and communications professional. Born in Colombia to a Christian Palestinian father and a Jewish mother, she moved to the United States and received an undergraduate degree in journalism from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst and a master's degree in international and public affairs from Columbia University. You might be the only person that I've ever had in literary Modiin we went to the same graduate school. And for more than 2 decades, she worked on strategic communication initiatives with corporate and nonprofit clients and currently writes and lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her family. So let me put the spotlight on you, and Sonia, you can take it away.
Thank you. And thank you, Julie, for the introduction and for inviting me to talk about the book. I'm so happy to be here. I'm looking forward to talking about the book, which is a memoir called The Roots of the Guava Tree, Growing Up Arab and Jewish in Colombia, but also about the themes of identity and family and diaspora, which I think are important to us all or affect us all. As Julie mentioned in her intro, I grew up with a Christian Palestinian father and a Jewish mother in Colombia. I was born there, I grew up there, and I honestly didn't set out to write a book about my family or about growing up at all. Just a few years ago, something happened to me, what perhaps has happened to some of you. I became middle-aged and my kids grew up and I had more time, and I decided to take a creative writing class. Happened to be a memoir class, and two things came out of that, which is one, I fell in love with the genre of memoir, and two, I started writing about my childhood and about my parents and my grandparents' identities and backgrounds, and thinking about it in a way that I hadn't really considered before. And I realized two things. One is that memoir is an amazing genre, and I'll talk a little bit about it too. But the other thing I realized is that immigrants tend to have, I'm an immigrant, and tend to have bifurcated identities sometimes and experiences. My childhood just seems so different than my current adult life, and the writing sort of became a method and a way to connect both parts of my life, my life in Colombia, my life in my new country, and sort of what it meant to me and what it meant to me going forward. One of the other reasons I wrote the book was because I think that the global Arab and Jewish experience is so diverse and so global, and sometimes we don't hear diverse stories. We tend to hear about certain types of Arab and Jewish experiences over and over again, and especially in a time of extreme polarization, I thought that I could just put a little pebble of, a different kind of story on the table for consideration. I think our job as human beings is to connect to one another, and sometimes books connect us through family stories and shared histories. I wanted to talk a little bit about memoir because sometimes people don't really know what it is. I have a friend who asked me, in a very nice way, why I thought anybody would be interested in my life, which, it's a very good question. But I think he was thinking that I was writing an autobiography. Autobiography is a story of an entire life, start to finish, went to school, dates, a little dry and a little more documented. In a way, memoir is a slice of life. All of us have many memoirs in us, and that's what I love about the genre. Memoir could be about a 5-minute experience somebody had or a 5-year experience somebody had, but ultimately it was about their growth as a human being and what they learned from the experience. Memoirs are about ordinary people living through ordinary and extraordinary circumstances and what they took from that. So as an introduction to the book, I'm going to do a super short reading of the actual introduction of the book, which is a conversation, is a sample conversation that I had with my dad when I was growing up. I'm about 8 years old in this scene, and my dad is my dad is answering the questions, and my voice is asking the question. Why do my sister and I not have a religion? Because you can decide when you grow up. But how do I decide? See if religion makes sense to you. Why do my grandparents speak Yiddish? Because they came from Russia. Do all people in Russia speak Yiddish? Of course not, they speak Russian. So why do my grandparents speak Yiddish? Because they are Jewish. Do all Jews speak Yiddish? Only Jews from certain parts of Europe. What do the other ones speak? Why don't you go play? Why do my other grandparents speak Arabic? Because they came from Bethlehem. Isn't that where Jesus is from? That's what they say. So, did Jesus speak Arabic? Don't ever ask these questions in public. But we are not in public. No lo hagas. Why can't I ask these questions? Because people get upset about religion. But I was only asking about languages. Silence. Why don't we have normal Colombian names? Your grandparents come from different places, and their names are our names. But we are not like other Colombians. We're not that different. But we are not Catholic. I guess that's true. So then, what are we? We are nothing. But I knew that we were so much more. So that's the introduction to the memoir. And before I get into my family and my background, just a little background on Colombia for those of you who might not be familiar with contemporary Colombian history. The book is really set in the 70s and 80s, which is when I was growing up. And there was always political conflict in Colombia, but in the 80s, the traditional conflict between left-wing insurgent guerrillas and the government really added a third party, which were the very powerful drug cartels that arose due to demand for cocaine in the Western world. And it became a three-way war funded with, narco dollars and a lot of weaponry, and many Colombians got caught in the crossfire. In the book, I talk about the takeover of the Supreme Court building in Bogota in the mid-1980s, which was very shocking and led to the death of half of the Supreme Court justices in Colombia. I talk about a kid who was kidnapped in my school. I talk about 2 boys we knew who died in an ambush avenging of a kidnapped family member. I talk about many people who were threatened and left Colombia never in the middle of the night and never came back. And I also talk about people who just, like my family, we weren't directly affected, but it was just all around us. And I thought it was important to put a human face on events that sometimes people see in Netflix, through certain Netflix series or these sort of very dramatized ways in which history affects ordinary human beings. Sometimes people don't really, see that. So I thought it was a hard time in Colombian history. So that's partly what the book is about. Certainly when I'm in the latter part of the year as I'm a teenager and violence is getting worse. I also grew up in Cali, Colombia, which is the third largest city in Colombia. And my parents built a house from the ground up in what was then a very remote suburb in the south of the city. So my childhood was spent in the swimming pool, surrounded by a beautiful garden full of animals, bats, cockroaches, insects, infestations, all kinds of, there's a lot of animals in the book and a lot of animal life. And to some extent, it was idyllic, but it was also secluded. And The pool and the house are a big part of my early childhood. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. So a little background on my parents. My parents were both born in Colombia. My parents are both Colombian first generation immigrants. And I'm sure even though nobody talked about it in those days, they were also trying to figure out their own identities as first generation Colombians and children of immigrants. My Arab grandfather left Ottoman era Bethlehem in the 1910s. He and eventually his whole family left. They left seeking better economic opportunities and also to avoid the conscription of Christian Arab boys into the Ottoman Empire, into the Ottoman armies. I think a lot of people don't know that there's a very, very large Christian Arab diaspora in Latin America, in Colombia for sure, but also in particular in Chile is very large. A lot of people, I think Chile is 500,000 people, Arab descendants. And so that was a whole story of, Ottoman Arabs and also Ottoman era Jews who came to Colombia. Many Jews from Syria and Lebanon and the Levant came to Latin America at the same time, probably for very similar reasons. My Jewish parents came to Colombia in the 1930s. I think the doors were closed to the United States at the time, and they found visas to come to Colombia. I think sometimes people don't know that there are Jewish communities in Latin America as well. They came in the 30s, escaping anti-Semitism and seeking better economic opportunities. When they came to Colombia, they certainly, I don't know if they expected to ever return home, but after World War II and the Holocaust, they lost all of their families who had stayed, were gone. And I think that sense of devastation and loss for them was really, really difficult. And I don't think they ever really quite overcame that. In the book, I write a lot about my grandmothers. I knew them best, and they lived the longest with me. So I'll tell you a little bit about them. My Arab grandmother, I look a lot like her, so I'm physically connected to her, and she was very much a woman of her time. She came from a very traditional Arab Levantine family. She was married at 15. She had 3 children before the age of 19. She had another one later. She was a phenomenal cook. So to this day, I just love Israeli and Palestinian food because of her. She really, she was making it in Colombia, where at the time where nobody really knew what it was. But I grew up eating tabbouleh and hummus and kibbeh and all of these delicious foods that she made. She was cared for by her sons and her husband. She was widowed at 50 and moved into the oldest son's home. And she exerted her power in a little bit and her voice in a little bit more of a passive way and a little more passive aggressive way, some might say. And I do write a lot about her in the book. And until I wrote about her, I didn't quite consider what it felt like to be married at 15, to have 3 children as a teenager, to have a household where endless immigrants were always arriving from Bethlehem, and she had to get them on their feet for years. And how she really probably wanted to run my grandparents' store, and everybody said she was the business brains, but that I don't think was in the cards for her in the culture that she lived in and at the times. My Jewish grandmother, in great contrast, was very much in charge, very much the owner of her life, very not like the granny of any book that most people read. She had long red nails. She played poker. She apparently told off-color jokes in Yiddish. I didn't speak Yiddish. I didn't understand that some of these perhaps weren't family-friendly comments at the time, but she danced, and she was the boss, and she came from probably a more educated background in Europe than most Jewish girls at the time. She had a high school education. She spoke Russian and German. And I think forever mourned the loss of her station in life when she came to Colombia and became a random schlepper immigrant, as she would say. And she met my grandfather also from Bessarabia, but that's a slightly different part in Colombia, and they married there. Um, until I wrote the book, I didn't consider what it was like for my grandparents to arrive from Europe they took a boat from probably Italy and arrived in Barranquilla, which is a port city in the north part of Colombia. I was there last year and it is so hot there. I just don't know what it was like for somebody from what is now Ukraine arriving in that heat, humidity. My grandmother did talk about, getting off the boat and seeing mangoes and bananas and things that she had never in her life imagined, and palm trees and black people. And it probably felt like stepping off a spaceship on Venus. I didn't really, I just always thought it was so funny that she arrived. Wow, she speaks Yiddish. It's so funny that my grandparents are so strange. And in the end, after I wrote the book, I thought my grandparents were not strange. My grandparents were just incredible and such brave people. And also in the book, it's no secret because in the beginning and in the end, I talk about becoming an immigrant myself and not quite realizing that I think I followed the example and the courage of my grandparents to leave their homes and their families to find a new life and a new future. Um, I'll talk a little bit about my parents. Julie, you'll tell me if I'm going over time because I forgot to track it. My parents met in the 1960s in Bogota. My mom was from there; it's the capital, and my dad was working. Colombia in the past and now the textile industry in Colombia was started by, run by, and owned by Arabs and Jews. So there were a lot of overlaps in the textile industry. And my father had my father's a textile engineer. He had many Jewish friends, and one of them invited him to mostly Jews whose parents came from the Levant. So there were a lot of connections between Arabic speaking Jews and Arabs and family ties. So he was invited to a party, and my mom was there, and they met and they fell in love. And my parents always I think downplayed the scandalous nature of their union. But in those years, if a Sephardi Jew married an Ashkenazi Jew, it was scandalous. So I think there was a lot that people said behind closed doors about my parents that they either pretended to ignore or didn't want to see or whatever. But they fell in love, and I think what brought them together was that they shared many values. They shared being first generation immigrants. They shared the desire to get out, improve their lives. They shared the experience of being the children of immigrants with very little in the way of material wealth. Both my grandparents had stores, and my parents either, you know, worked in the store, slept in the store sometimes when there wasn't money for rent. And I think they both really wanted to become professionals and raise their economic status and make their lives better through education and hard work. And they had a lot of those things in common. Um, I think my parents really considered themselves modern and progressive. And at the time, I think they considered that some of the things in their family were a little tribal and they didn't want to be looking at the Arabic and the Yiddish. They wanted to be looking forward toward, American efficiency and a scientific method type inquiry and things like that. But I think in distancing themselves from their past, they maybe cut themselves off a little too much from the tree. So the roots of the guava tree is about a guava tree in my backyard that was very healthy and thriving in place, which sometimes my parents weren't, because I don't think that they necessarily were strongly rooted or had strongly rooted our family. Um, so until I wrote the book, I didn't appreciate how rebellious and independent my parents were, how almost utopian they were, and that they thought that they could create a family without labels, without religions, without identities, and plop us on top of a house constructed from the ground up in a suburban place in Cali, Colombia, and that have that be completely normal. Nobody would ever ask any questions about that. It was, of course, totally fine. Um, and I also think that to some extent they were trying to protect me. It was a fraught time in Colombia to be talking about religion, to be talking about left-wing politics in particular, to be talking about certain ideas. And I think they really didn't want me to I was a little chatty, and they didn't want me to give me talking points to talk to my friends about, and they wanted to protect me. And I think what I was reading as frustration with not being, as I was reading for their, I was reading it as they're not wanting to answer my questions. I think they also really wanted to protect me and not give me too much information. But the book is about what is lost when you don't talk about identity and when you don't talk about backgrounds and stories. And in some ways, I feel like I have recovered what was lost, but also really appreciate all they gave me in terms of their values and the things that I took from them. So if I have, is there time for another slight little reading? If I'm out of time, it's totally fine. A little more?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
So I'll read a little bit about it from a chapter called, it's a more lighthearted chapter in the book called The Monkey on the Mango Tree. And it's a chapter about a monkey in my backyard and my father, who was a very formal man and had some conflicted relationships with the empirical method and what's real and what isn't, and the nature that surrounded him. The Monkey on the Mango Tree. The neighbor's miniature pet monkey, Pancho, a naughty little creature, has been climbing over our red brick wall. The mini primate preens and parades from the highest branches of our mango tree, setting off the dog's frustrated barking, knowing they can't get to him. The monkey also enjoys munching on illicit delicacies such as the Chinese cherries from my father's fickle and failing tree, which he cares for with painstaking effort despite the empirical evidence pointing to its demise. My father loathes this animal, although he is selective about which manners to take up with our neighbors, who also own 2 deer that roam the property like creatures in a Greek myth. My sister and I climb on top of a rusted, unused metal doghouse in our backyard, an archaeological ode to where Lino used to sleep, and peek over the brick wall at the neighbor's garden. We marvel at all the creatures, including the 2 German shepherds that snarl and lunge at us along the bottom of the fence. We also feel safe up above, knowing that the neighbors are indulgent about our intrusions because they also, like my father, pick their battles. The limits of this arrangement become clear one day when my father sits at a white tulip table under the mango tree, sipping a scotch. A rustling up above indicates Pancho's presence. The little monkey makes its way down the trunk and, in a lightning fast move, jumps on the table. Stunned, my sister and I stare at the scene in silence, furtively eyeing our tall, formal father, who prefers to observe animals from a clinical distance or, better yet, on television. Well, look at this, our father says, startled, as the furry little brown monkey inspects him with sparkly black eyes from the edge of the table. Niñas, look at the monkey. We descend from them. It's so clear that evolution is real, he is saying, when he's interrupted by Pancho's jump toward him. His black rubbery hand reaches into my father's whiskey glass. Before we can take a breath, he picks out one of the cold crystal ice cubes. As the monkey caresses the ice, his small dark eyes calmly regard my father, who has frozen in mid-sentence. The primate then lifts the cube, dripping with premium scotch, and lifts it to his lips, licking and sucking with pleasure. We all hold our breath. Suddenly, my father springs back to life. Mico maldito, he yells, roaring astonishing words we have never heard him say. He hurls the rest of the whiskey, glass and all, at Pancho, who scampers off into the mango tree branches, screeching with joy. My father storms into the house while my sister and I look at each other, laughing. Riva, the Miko drank my whiskey, we hear him tell my mom angrily, and we hear her laugh incredulously. We laugh harder. He asked my mother for the neighbor's telephone number. Confrontation is not something he normally chooses. We position ourselves strategically to hear our father exchanging polite but curt words with their monkey with the neighbors about their monkey. Les agradezco, my father says curtly, thanking the neighbors for whatever they just agreed to do and hanging up the phone. After that, Pancho is tied down on the neighbor's property, and we never again see him on our mango tree. There are limits. Evolution might be logical, but nature doesn't always win.
Thank you. That's
Thank you.
great. That's a great section that you just read.
Thank you. Thank you. And that's all I had prepared for today.
Okay. Okay, great. Um, Let me introduce our next authors, or in this case, editor and translator. Yoni Hammer-Kossoy is a poet, translator, and educator. Yoni's first poetry collection, The Book of Noah, was published by Grayson Books in 2023, and he appeared on Literary Modiin a little while after that. And his translations of The Class of 95 appeared in 2025, and Zmira Poran Sion's collections, I Am Samar and Forbidden to Write About Happiness, were published in 2023 and 2024. Winner of the 2020 Andrea Moria Prize in Poetry, Yoni taught poetry this past semester as part of the Shandy Rudolph Graduate Program in Creative Writing at Bar-Ilan University and teaches English language at the Jerusalem College of Technology. Born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, Yoni has lived with his family in Jerusalem since 1999. And Barak Sella is an educator, writer, and community organizer specializing in U.S.-Israel relations and world Jewry. Born in Texas, he moved to Israel in 1994, a year before the Rabin assassination, an event that shaped his civic path. He was a leader in Israel's National Labor Youth Union, and he educated thousands of teens about peace, democracy, and Yitzhak Rabin's legacy, and he edited the first literary anthology on the assassination class of 95. He later served as executive director of the Reut Institute, working on anti-Semitism and Israel-U.S. relations. Since October 7th, he has been a leading Israeli-American voice against campus anti-Semitism, particularly at Harvard Kennedy School, where he earned his MPA. So let me spotlight Yoni and Barak, and I guess we are all immigrants on this Literary Modiin tonight. And Yoni and Barak, take it away.
Hey, thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure even more to be here with Yoni. We together spent many, many hours trying to bring this project to life. So I think I'll start. I'll share a few minutes about the book, how it happened. And I think then Yoni will talk specifically about the translation process, which was very challenging. So as I said, I was born in the US, and I moved to Israel at the end of 1994 when I was about 9 years old. Born to Israeli parents in Texas, who decided to bring us back to Israel because they wanted us to grow up as Israeli, but they also felt that it was a good time to move back because Rabin came into power, and it was a moment of, hope, optimism, normalcy just around the corner. And for them, it seemed like a good time to bring their kids into a reality in which, when I was growing up in the 90s, it was very common that people would say to young boys, well, by the time you have to go to the army, maybe we won't have to go to the army anymore. And so Rabin was always the symbol for leadership, for optimism, the first Israeli leader that I knew. And the moment that he was assassinated was not just, a tragedy for Israel and for Jews. It was also a personal tragedy and a moment of political awakening that really shaped not only my political views, but also my identity, because my journey as becoming an Israeli was parallel to Israel's attempt to come to terms with the fact that a Jewish citizen assassinated an Israeli prime minister. When Rabin was assassinated, many people thought that it was an Arab terrorist. They couldn't conceive that it was actually a fellow Jew who raised his gun against our leader. Growing up, I became very politically active in my local youth movement. And I always thought that it was important to educate people on Rabin's legacy, for his image, his values, but not only about Rabin, but about also the meaning of this event, right? I think the Rabin assassination is one of the most important events in Jewish life in the 20th century, because Jewish life is, Jewish history, for most of Jewish history, we were not sovereign people. We are learning sovereignty, and we are learning what it means to live in a society where we disagree with one another on issues that are essential to our future. Deep, real disagreements. And the Rabin assassination should be a warning sign for us, right? So I was very involved in preserving that legacy and making sure that people in Israel and in the Jewish world understand that lesson, that we need to choose democracy over our arguments. We need to choose living together over violence. And so later in life, I also became the national spokesperson for the Rabin Memorial Rally in Tel Aviv for several years. And the story about this book, Class of 95, is very interesting because the way that it came to life is that one of the years I was running the memorial in Rishon LeZion, city south of Tel Aviv. And other than the event that, ceremonies, songs, text, the same old thing every year, we wanted to do a different event, something to appeal to a younger crowd. And we were thinking, what if we do this cool poetry night, right? Rabin assassination, it's such a huge event in Israeli history. For sure, there's a lot of poetry written about it, literature, short stories, something. And we went and started searching, and we couldn't find anything that was published. It was like the Rabin assassination, when it comes to literature, was totally absent. So we put out a call for poems, thinking we're just going to do this event. Maybe a few people will, submit. And we were swamped with dozens and dozens of poems that were just waiting in drawers all over Israel. And we realized that this is more than just a poetry night. And we quickly published the first edition 12 years ago. And we named it Machzor 95, which in English translates to Class of 95, but also Machzor Tfilah, the cycle of prayer, because we wanted to create, something beyond articles and op-eds and memorial texts. We wanted to create a literary space where people can heal, can reflect on the trauma, but also build a narrative of memory. Because if you want the Jewish people and the Israelis to remember the Rabin assassination and the lessons from it, not in 2 years, 10 years, 50 years, but in 200, 500 years, you need to create canon and texts. You need to create stories and narratives. And that was the attempt in Machzor 95. And we put out the first edition. Later in 2022, we published a second edition that was much more mature, and it brought together more than 70 poets and authors from Israel, from very diverse identities and politics. And I always had a dream to bring this to the American Jewish community, mostly because in the last 10 years, I've been working a lot in the States. I'm now in the States working with the American Jewish community. And I learned that the Rabin Memorial Day is just completely absent from American Jewish society. Even though if you go to any American Jew age 40, 45 and up, they will remember what happened to them on the night a Rabin was murdered in the same intensity, maybe, that they remember where they were when they heard October 7th was happening. It was such a huge event, but different political and sociological developments sort of pushed away Rabin from memory and created a situation where American Jews in many ways have forgotten Rabin. So that's how we came to do Class of 95, which is, we took 40 authors, 40 poems from the original collection that we felt would be able to serve the narrative the best for American Jews. We brought Judah Kurtzer, the president of Shalom Hartman Institute, to write a foreword. And we also designed, and this is the last thing I'll say before I'll pass it to Yoni, we decided to edit the book in a different structure. So basically, there's 5 chapters in the book who are all following the stages of Jewish mourning. So what 5? There's ones that are more familiar, there's Shiva, but the 7 days after the death. There's the Shloshim, the 30 days, and Shana, after 1 year when the memorial mitzvot are over. But we added 2 more. One is in the beginning, and it's a stage of mourning that is called Aninut, which is a specific stage between someone who died until burial, where you are exempt from religious practices, because basically Judaism is recognizing that you are in shock and is not expecting anything from you. Just take care of the burial. So the first chapter is really about the shock that people are feeling. And the last chapter, we found something very interesting in Jewish tradition, where the sages differentiated between 2 types of mourning. They called Avelut Chadasha and Avelut Yeshana, new mourning and old mourning. New mourning is any type of, person that in your life passes away, that is killed, and you have this mourning for him. It's a new mourning. It's a mourning that's in your life. But there's a different type of mourning called old mourning, where you mourn on something that did not happen in your lifetime. The best example for this is the destruction of the Second Temple that happened 2,000 years ago. But still, Jews every year fast for a day and actually mourn the loss of the Second Temple as a personal event. And we chose this as the summarizing chapter because we want Rabin's assassination not to be just something that is mourned and remembered by the people who experienced it at the time, or maybe had support for Rabin's policies and vision, but we want to create it as a memory that is part of the Jewish canon, Jewish history. And we want people generations from now mourning this event, not because they knew Rabin, but because of what this symbolizes. It symbolizes a failure in our sovereignty. And we believe that learning and remembering this failure is critical for building a better future and learning from our failures. So that's the story of Class of 95. And Yoni, I'll bring it to you.
Thank you, Julie, for this opportunity. So I'll just say a few words about the process of translation and translation. And I can maybe break it down into a few stages. First, even before I ever get to the words themselves, to the poems, I personally, I need to connect to a project. And it was really funny. This even from the very first conversation was something where I just knew I needed to be part of the process. So, and all the more so after reading some of the poems, reading the whole collection. This was something where it felt incredibly important for me to be part of this, both in terms of the overall message, but I think also because it feels to me that poetry, literature, even poetry more so, is a way to really get to people's hearts. And so that if we're talking about trying to help people feel the power of the loss and the power of the moment, both in its time, but also in a continuation through generation, poetry is really, I think, the way to go. It's a way to say things that very few other forms of discourse or literature can do it. So that was even before getting to the words. The second was the challenge of working with 40 different poets. It's a little schizophrenic to sort of shape shift and voice shift and the importance of getting to each to the essence of each poem and to bring that to its as I've like to say when it comes to translation, that it's relocation. It's not just even the poems themselves are immigrants, and that they are and part of that process of bringing them fresh into the new language, which is English. Afterwards, there was the editing, and I worked closely with Barak, but also we worked with the poets themselves to get their feedback, their input, obviously their approval, but also their clarifications. And that was also, again, back to the schizophrenia, but also very important in clarifying. And it felt to me like it was that the overall process was one of, I think everyone was really, really invested in getting it right. There was a sense of mission throughout all of this. And I'll maybe add one other thing. I'm not sure that Barak and I had a chance to talk about this ever, but like part of the time that we've writing and editing was this was during the this was during the war with Iran. I don't want to say part one, but it was during the war with Iran, back in June, and it's kind of there was a bit of a cognitive dissonance at that point of sort of like, I could be sitting at the computer and sirens were going off and there was all sorts of things happening. But perhaps if there was an echo, it's a sense of historical moment that being at a time when big things are happening, brought home just the importance of working with this event, with the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, and how it was and continues to be and needs to be part of the Jewish historical consciousness. So that was something that was kind of powerful for me as part of the process of translation. And I think, obviously, I can't point to a particular word, but maybe some of that vibe is in there in the the translation as well. So I think we'd like to read a few selections from this. We'll do a few. We'll start with one. Barak will read the Hebrew, and then I'll read the English. I'll do a longer one in English, and then maybe we'll close with Hebrew and English again.
So, Yoni, we should start with Forgiven?
Yeah.
Okay, Forgiven. So I'll also say that all the poems are in Hebrew and in English. They look like this, one by one, and they're sort of edited to make sure that the Hebrew and the English are as parallel as can be. So I'll read the Hebrew. Nislach by Eden Abubul. אבא שלי גזר לשניים את הסטיקר לא נשכח ולא נסלח. חצי אחד הדביק על הפגוש סובארו, וחצי שני כימת וזרק והדליק סיגריה. לעתים רחוקות התייסרתי עם מצפוני על שהייתי פורץ ארונות נעולים, שולף מהם זיכרונות ומשמיע תקליטים. מדרדר במדרון ההתפתחות, גוש נוסטלגי מאיים, לבקע כל חומה מדומה. זוכר צערי שישי אחד, אספת אותי מהישיבה במיצובישי הכחולה, השמעתי לך את שפשף ופתאום הצטרפת למאיר. בצעקה ובצעקה ההיא היה הכל מהכל, וצמרמורת ארוכה, למרות שלא הייתי צריך לה, בכדי לדעת שסלחנו מהר, בכדי לדעת שאתה ואמא לעולם לא תוכלו מול ציניות ואטימות. והשיר נמשך, והדלקת סיגריה. כל ילדותי התבוננתי בעשן הזה.
Forgiven. My father tore in two the sticker that said, "We won't forget, we won't forgive," then stuck one half on the Subaru's bumper and crumpled up and threw away the other and lit a cigarette. Now and then, I wrestled with my conscience about the fact that I would break into locked closets, pull out memories and play all the oldies, roll a boulder of nostalgia down the slope of disillusionment, threatening to shatter every figurative wall. I remember one Friday afternoon, you picked me up from yeshiva in the blue Mitsubishi, and I put on Shaf Shaf's song, and suddenly you joined in with Meir, shouting together, "We can go together to the light." And everything about everything was in that shout. And it gave me goosebumps. And even though I didn't need it, to know how quickly we forgave, to know that you and Mom could never stand a chance against cynicism and indifference. And the song played on, and you lit a cigarette. I spent my whole childhood staring into this smoke.
Lovely.
Okay, hang on a second. So I've never read this one to a crowd. It's a touch long, but it's really one of my favorites, and I just love the way it takes us through the night. It takes us in some level through the heads of players in this event. It really cinematic in scope, going in and out, and it, yeah, I like the first time, and when I was done and I read it
Yeah.
to somebody at home, it was quite it was quite a moment. Anyway,
And it was written by Daphne Barshilon, who edited the second Hebrew edition.
um, okay, one second. You're talking about an easy math. Hang on
Oh,
a
you were talking
second.
about a different
I
poem?
was talking about, so I'm going to do Song for Peace. I
Oh,
think
do Song for
if,
Peace. Sorry.
if
Song
there's
for Peace
time,
is
I'm going to
better.
do Song for Peace.
Do Song for Peace. Thank you.
Let's do Song for Peace, which is of course named after the song that was very much part of that moment, which was being sung just before Rabin was assassinated. Okay, Song for Peace. Just a second. Okay, so just sing a song for peace. Write a song of murder. Go get him, Rabin. Go get him. Go get 2 bullets in your back. Choke on your blood on the way to Ichilov. But look, Yitzchak, look out the window. See Ibn Gibirol and the dark skies over Rembrandt Street. See Tel Aviv, the Hebrew city, city of nightmares. Remember, Rabin, the Kaduri school, how you worked the land. Remember how you conquered Jerusalem. You gathered the exiles. Now the exiles have gathered you. Camp David, terror attacks. Let Perez have his share. Fasten seatbelts. The tribe has spoken. Your Israel exists in Channel 1 footage. Your Israel is in the teardrops on the blue shirts of Hashomer Hatzair that nobody wears anymore. John Lennon also went down those stairs in Kings of Israel Square. Kennedy, too, Lincoln, even Mahatma. Go get eternal rest. The doors of heaven aren't locked. Gamal Abdel Nasser's waiting for you, too, with a flute of champagne and the ghosts of the Antalena on a carpet of broken bones. And for us, Machiavelli's Fortuna awaits, an evil smile in Zion Square. The city you conquered, Rabin, has conquered us and elected Yigal Amir prime minister. And so just sing a song for peace and sing Hariut, hum a walk to Caesarea, announce in shock and sorrow, take 'em, Rabin, take 'em, take the bullets from the kid you didn't take without a red booklet, but with a little blacklist waiting for you by the drivers between the bodyguards at the rally of Second Israel's New Guard, where nobody would notice a murderer wearing a kippah, smiling like a boy, like an angel by the stairs. Meanwhile, you have to say that you too are moved by the end, but the end of the night was far more moving, Rabin. Everyone was moved to the bones when they filled your back with lead. Ibn Gibral was in tears, and there was a flood in Florentine the night they got you, Rabin. My father said, we're going. And I said, Yalla, let's go. And when we landed, Aviv Geffen sang, just like he did on stage, the night they shot 2 bullets in your back, your strong, upright Hebrew back. You establish a whole new state and end up dying like an old ghetto Jew. You, the Marlboro man. Where is King Hussein's lighter now when we need to light candles for you, candles upon candles upon candles? The autumn night falls on the Negev, while you fall on the stones in Tel Aviv, and gently, gently lights the stars. I don't remember if your glasses broke. Let the sun rise and shine on the angels of destruction. You've messed up with wicked angels, Rabin, coalition angels, and with the Lord of the Messiah's armies. Yasser Arafat can't deliver you from your troubles. God will deliver us. Yigal will deliver you. Posted Denura on all our mothers and a curse on all the women you loved. Think a moment about Leah while you're dying in that Cadillac. Always eloquent, mesmerizing hair, the peak of elegance, from dollar accounts to the pit at Herzl. And what a beauty your granddaughter was at the funeral, right next to Bill Clinton and Prince Charles. Shalom, buddy. Shalom, Hanasenish. Shalom, Theodore. Shalom to the revolution. The Jewish state became Judea on the night they prayed against you in the cemeteries. The righteous suffer, the evil rejoice. Injustice for generations. Arak and Srak, Srak and Srak. All is empty and vain, and forever returns the people suffering in the square of their kings. King David sent us off to die. Solomon exploited everyone to build the temple, not even a loaf of bread to heal the dead. Between the golden statues on the Holy of Holies and the breaking news on TV, Yaakov, Arla, Ishmael, Yitzchak, and Esav, hollow point, tip of a spear, ministering angels, Rabbin, angels of peace, messengers of the Most High. Shema Yisrael, Rabbin, Shema Yisrael, wallow in your blood on the way to Ichilov. What is happening to you is what happened to everyone who ever was. Ashes to ashes, you, peace, ashes and dust. Fire, brothers, fire, fire, sisters, fire, dust and ashes. By the sand near the water, you can almost hear the rustling of the waves. Between the blasts and the walls, they shot Rabin. They shot Rabin. Oh God, full of mercy. They shot Rabin. Rabin's dead.
Thank you, Yoni.
What a poem. Mashu.
I'll just conclude is that again, the goal for us doing poetry is to allow to create a space around the issue that is still in Israel, very contested. I think that what poetry does is that it allows people from, specifically on this issue, from maybe opposing views, opposing camps, to access some kind of deeper truth. And there's a story that I tell a lot that explains why we did this book. I am not a poet. I'm not I'm not like Yoni. I'm not a person from the poetry space. I come more from the social activism and policy space. That's what I do my day to day. But there's a story that I think connects the both. And this is a story about Chaim Guri, the author, that in 1977 goes to Cairo. And when he's in Cairo, he meets with an Egyptian intellectual, Professor Fauzi, who tells Guri the following. He says, if the Israeli intelligence officers after 67 would have visited the bookstores in Cairo and read Egyptian poetry, they would have never been surprised in October 1973. Because poetry cannot lie. And then he sums and he says, every intelligence officer should read poetry. And the reason is there's a lot of op-eds and articles, describing the Rabin assassination, the effect, but they're very easy to manipulate. But poetry, this attempt to surface the truth, allows people to view a window into the soul of a society coming to terms with this tragedy. And I think it's a window not only for Israelis to look at themselves, but hopefully this book will allow also non-Hebrew speakers to gain a deeper insight into the vibrations of this event, not only in the Israeli psyche, but how we understand ourselves and where our future is going. And again, there's a lot of contradicting narratives in this book, but I think taking them all in allows people to feel not only deeper understanding, but also a deeper agency over what we're grappling with. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Yoni and Barak. I'm gonna add my spotlight and Sonia's spotlight back, so you can all put your questions in the chat. I should say, by the way, I mentioned that we're all immigrants here, but I made Aliyah 2 weeks before the Rabin assassination. That was my first month in Israel that happened. So, yeah. While people are putting their questions in, I'll make a few other comments. Chaim Guri also has the famous saying, which I love, Shlomi keshlom ami, right? Like how are you? I am only as well as my people. So, which I guess I've been saying a lot for the last 2.5 years. Um, so I'm gonna address my first question to Yoni and Barak, which is how are you bringing it to English speaking audiences besides literary Modiin, of course. We do have a number of people who like run book clubs on here, so that's good. Hopefully, some of them will invite you to come and speak at their shuls or their sisterhoods or Hadassah groups. But what else are you doing? How are you? Have you brought it to any? Have you had any events with other English speaking audiences, or what's going on with that?
Okay. Well, so first of all, you can get the book on Amazon and order it to anywhere in the world. And that's the most important thing, is making it accessible. We had support from the World Zionist Organization in publishing this book, but it's an independent, we did this on our own. We didn't work with a publisher. The biggest event we did was last November on the 30th anniversary of Rabin's assassination. We did a very big event at the Stryker Center at New York City with Dan Shapiro and with Rabin's grandson, Yonatan. And about 200 people showed up, and it was really emotional because not only was it the launch of the book, it was also the largest Rabin memorial event, probably in the US, but definitely in New York City. So the goal of the book is not only just to be a book, it's also to help create a culture of memory in the diaspora. So that's one thing. We've been, promoting the book. There's a website. You can find a lot of press that has been done around the book. If you go to theclassof95.com, just 2 days ago, I did a lecture here in Boston for a leadership group of the Israeli Policy Forum. We did an event about the book here at the Harvard Kennedy School. And hopefully, I think I don't know if the word is beauty, but this is an evergreen book. So the hope is that this will be used as a tool every November around the anniversary, and it will help people. If I'm a teacher and I want to speak to my students about Rabin, I can just pick up the book and pick 2 poems and talk about it. Or if I'm a parent who wants to talk to their children, or if I'm a rabbi who's writing a sermon. So the hope is that it will also serve as an educational and programmatic tool that people will use on their own. And we've been thankful to get some support, and we've shared the books with several different institutions who received copies of the book to use for their own use.
See, there's a question in the chat for Sonia from Abigail. Beautiful words by all. Thank you. Sonia, as your English is so fluent, I'm wondering if English is your mother tongue, or if not, when did you learn it, and what do your parents make of this memoir if they have read it?
Those are good questions. My parents, in the book I write about my parents' decision to send me to the American school to get an education. It was at the time the only truly secular school in Cali, Colombia. Every other school taught Catholic religion in one way or another. So with my American secular education came English, and a gift that I had that my parents gave me to be able to communicate in 2 languages pretty fluently. What do my family made? Was it the question, my family or my parents? My dad unfortunately passed away the year that the book was published, so he never read it. I did interview him extensively for the book, and he was, of course, very willing to talk to me, but I think he would have been a little bit nervous and hesitant to have the book out in the world initially. I think now maybe not so much. And my mom has been very supportive. So I've been very lucky.
Does she still live in Colombia?
No, my mom my parents moved to be near me in the United States many years ago.
And your sister, is she also in the United States?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow. What about the rest of the family? Do you still have family in Colombia? Palestinian?
I do. So
And
a lot of in the 80s, a lot of people my age who could leave left. And so a lot of my cousins, my first cousins primarily live in the US. I have a cousin who made Aliyah, and so he's in Israel. I do have some cousins left in Colombia, but mostly the elders were left, and they've unfortunately passed away recently. So I have a lot of friends left, but not as much close family.
let me ask about, well, this is a question, I guess, for all three of you. We've talked a little bit about the immigrant experience. Um, First of all, are there any poems in the class of 95 written by Olim? And were they feel any different than the ones from the native born Israelis? Um, and for Sonia, well, you guys answer that. Let me phrase my question for Sonia better while you're answering.
Actually, that's a great question. I'm actually not sure that there's any Olim.
Mhm.
I will say that in deciding to translate the book to English, at a certain point, we were considering reaching out and trying to get poems of Jews from different communities around the world. And we decided against it for two reasons. I would say the biggest reason is practical. We had a time frame, and we didn't have the time and resources to do the process. And second, I think for this version, we didn't want it to be really like an accessibility of an Israeli voice. But I will say, I see this as an ongoing project. This is not the final version. This is a third edition. I can really easily see myself, and Yoni, I hope you will join me maybe in the future when we do the fourth edition, because I think there are very important voices and there's a lot of voices, even though we try to include like diverse voices, there's a lot of voices that we didn't bring in here, and there's a limitation to that. But there is one poem actually that we didn't put in this actually from the second Hebrew edition. It's a very short poem about, I think it's an Israeli guy actually living in the US when Rabin is assassinated. He's talking about how he was asleep because it was noon. He was just, sleeping his Schlafstunde. And obviously he's talking more about how as an Israeli living outside of Israel, he wasn't sleep in general about his what's going on back home. But it's definitely a perspective to look for in the future.
Just to add, when I was translating, there was never a poem that I said, "Oh, this was written by an immigrant." I never had that feeling. But what I did have, and this is perhaps just a reflection of Israeli society, which is that voices were so different. And to an extreme, at some level, different I don't want to say in a negative way, you could say sectarian, but I think that the overall quilting of Israeli society is still holds it all together. So in that sense, it's just different voices from different groups, different perspectives. There's one in particular. I don't think we won't have time to read it now, but if anybody picks up the book, there's a poem called "Home," which really deals with that whole question of and it's bayit, which is also a very interesting. We had an interesting question about how to translate, because bayit could be house, as in the physical space, but it's also home, as in the place you live, and just how to translate that, and then how to reflect that within the poem itself. And that's definitely dealing with this question of a place in society.
And
So
by the way, that poem "Home," I think it was written by Efrat Yerdei, who's from the Ethiopian community in Israel. I'm not sure if she was born in Israel or not,
right.
but it's definitely written from the perspective of someone who is grappling with belonging, within Israeli society.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, when I think about the writers that I've had on the program here, and I always want to have someone from Israel and every event. And partly I started the whole series because there's a lot of Anglo-Israeli writers here and don't get the attention that some of the, more well-known Israeli authors get. And so I hope through the series, people are getting exposed to more of the Anglo-Israeli writers. Okay, so let me, but there is also the thing of, I don't write poetry, right? But and I was just as shocked as everyone else when the assassination happened. There, I feel like for a long time on certain days, like Yom HaZikaron, not that I didn't get it, but it wasn't like I hadn't gone through the army, so I hadn't, and I hadn't lost anyone close to me. So it took a very long time, I think, to really feel like, oh, I'm Israeli, and my kids went to the army and of course the last 2.5 years, certainly that feeling has gone away. I feel very Israeli. But I wonder, if I was just a two-week old Ola Chadasha, the assassination, how connected was I? I don't know. Something to think about. If I ever write a memoir, I have to. So let me I want to wrap things up in a few minutes, but Sonia, you talked all about the amazing genre that memoir is. We have a lot of writers on the call also. What advice would you have for them, or what people who want to maybe start dipping their toe into memoir? Where should they begin?
I found it very helpful to take a class. I spent my career in corporate communications and PR, and that kind of writing had become, the way that I wrote. And just stepping into a creative space was so wonderful and liberating and refreshing for the writers on the screen. I'm sure you're writing creatively for a while, but for me, it took me some time to get back into dialogue and character and scene and all of the things that have been drummed out of me through my work and training as a journalist and all of that. But I think mostly the advice that people gave me, and it seems so simple, is, just sit down and write. And it doesn't matter what comes out. Just write what's in there, write what you think. And then eventually I find it much easier to work with material than to just stare at an empty page. And eventually through the writing, the answers will come about what story you want to tell and what the important themes are and where you're headed.
Great. Yoni, you're shaking your head. What about any budding poets on the call? Any?
So translators.
Or translators.
Or both.
Or both.
One thing I'll just say is that that translation is no less an art than any other form of literature. And in that sense, it's just a joy. So I personally relate to it the same way that I relate to my own personal writing. And so I don't know about whatever works for people in terms of classes or diving in. I think that's the I did a little bit of both, but I think one really good way to try your hand at translation is to find a poem that you really love in one language and see what it's like to bring it to a new language, and try to let go of the I have to get this right and enjoy the sounds and see how that goes.
To say the only poem I've ever translated was by Chaim Guri. Actually, it was mentioned here.
Wow.
And
that's three. You're buying us ice cream, Julie.
What? Yeah,
You're going to buy us ice cream now.
Right. And I read at the Yom HaZikaron Tekes by my kids, the principal of my kids' school. And it was in April of 2024. So, right after the war started, or 6 months into the war. And I couldn't find anything. I was like, I still can't find really anywhere, barely anywhere where it was published originally. I don't even remember, the name is like Fetish or something like that. I read it at we had a number of solidarity events right after 7th, and then in the last 2 years around the anniversary. Huge file of all the poems. Hit Kaddish in consecration, yeah, by Chaim Guri. So if anyone out there knows like when it was first published in Hebrew, let me know. And I will say, this is the first event since October 7th that I did not have to read the Mishuberach for the return of any hostages. Thank God, thank God. It's, we weren't sure we would ever reach this day. But the body of Ron Vili was found and returned to Israel the day after our last event in January. So I'm glad I don't have to close with that anymore. What I will close with is to tell you about some of our upcoming events. So on March 15th, our original March Literary Modiin event is with Rachel Kaplan of The Spoon and the Sea, Maya Arad, Happy New Year's, and Howard Langer, The Last Decrepitzer. And now we're going to have a second event in March with Ziva Bukai, who will discuss The World Between, along with Sarah Ansbacher. Just find the name of her new book. Just came out this week. Okay, this will all be I'll have the registration page up by the time I send the thank you note, the thank you email tomorrow. Another Shore, Sarah Ansbacher, and Maxim D. Schreier, who has a new book of poetry, also bilingual poetry, called Parallel Lines. So that's on March 29th. April, our event is kind of around Yom HaShoah. So we have Elizabeth Rosner will be speaking about her book of poetry, Gravity. Martin Herskovitz, whose book is called also poetry. I think it's called Son of the Shoah. And Doron Karen, who is the grandson of Ignacy Shiker, who wrote Beneath the Lightless Sky, and it's just been translated to English. So he's going to talk about that. And our May event is going to be on May 17th. So stay tuned for details. And our June event, we have some people here for our June event, which is going to be in person in Modiin. Susan Kleinman all afternoon, Nora Gold doubles, and Rachel Tzvia Black, the dark robed mother. So we got a full lineup, lots of events. I'll send out all the links. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and special thank you to Sonia and Barak and Yoni for sharing your words with us. It was really great and really special to hear your voices and the words of the poets. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.